She threw the divorce papers on my face while I lay in a hospital bed, weak, disoriented, and barely aware of my own existence. The papers slapped my cheek, slid down my chest, and finally landed on the sheet, moving slightly with each shallow breath my body struggled to take. For a brief moment I thought I was dreaming, that my mind had conjured some cruel hallucination from the medications and the IVs. But when I looked at her, standing there perfectly composed, I knew with absolute clarity that this was real. She had chosen this moment deliberately, and I was trapped in it, powerless and completely exposed. The ICU room felt suffocating after that. The bright fluorescent lights overhead, the constant mechanical beeping, even the faint smell of antiseptic. It all pressed against me, echoing the impossibility of defending myself. She didn't move closer, didn't hold my hand, didn't speak another word. She stood at the edge of the bed, cool, calm, like a stranger delivering a verdict. And in that moment, the reality hit me harder than the illness ever had. The person I trusted most had already left me in spirit, even if her body was still in the room. She told me she couldn't do this anymore. That the life we had was no longer what she wanted. That hospitals, sickness, and uncertainty were things she wasn't willing to endure. Her voice was steady, controlled, almost clinical. There was no quiver, no hesitation, no hint of the woman I had fallen in love with. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was still alive, that I still loved her, that I wasn't finished, but my body refused me. My voice wouldn't come. My fingers twitched weakly as if reminding me that I was still here, still breathing, still alive. I tried to understand what had changed. Had it always been there, the coldness? Or did the sight of me broken, lying helpless, finally reveal her true feelings? I could feel the weight of betrayal pressing down on me more heavily than the tubes and machines ever could. She didn't just leave, she chose the worst possible moment to abandon me. And the cruelty of timing, I realized, cuts far deeper than the act itself. As she stepped back and walked toward the door, I searched her face for any sign of hesitation, regret, anything human. There was none. Her eyes were calm, distant, and fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if I was nothing more than a shadow on the floor. She placed her hand briefly on the papers as if adjusting them for neatness, a small, deliberate gesture that underscored the calculation in her mind. Then the door closed behind her, soft, almost polite. And suddenly the room felt infinitely emptier. The sound of her departure echoed louder in my chest than the alarms, as if each beep mocked my helplessness. Humiliation spread through me like wildfire. Not just from the betrayal, but from the knowledge that I couldn't stop it. I had been stripped of power, of dignity, of choice. I felt erased in the very place where I should have felt protected. Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing, of hope, of care. But in that room I felt none of those things. I felt exposed, discarded, and entirely unseen. And yet, beneath the shame, beneath the anger and the fear, something unexpected began to take root. A quiet, dangerous awareness. She had made a cold, calculated decision, believing that in my weakest moment she had all the power. But she didn't know, she couldn't know, that moments like these have a strange way of flipping control. I realized that her confidence, her certainty, was built on the assumption that I was defeated. And she would soon find out that she had only underestimated me. As the hours passed, I lay there, staring at the sterile ceiling, feeling every beat of the monitor as if it were a countdown. I thought about every word she had ever said, every laugh she had shared, every promise that now seemed hollow. She believed she had walked away from something broken. But in reality she had handed me a spark. That spark was humiliation, yes, but it was also clarity. It was the raw awareness that the man she thought powerless was still alive. And that awareness, I realized, is far more dangerous than rage. I began to replay the scene in my head over and over, imagining her walking down that hallway thinking she had won. Each repetition strengthened something inside me, a plan forming, a fire lighting, a silent vow that if I survived this, the person she would meet next time wouldn't be the weak, helpless man lying in that bed. She had made a grave mistake. She had mistaken my vulnerability for weakness, my silence for submission, my illness for the end of my story. And as I lay there, exhausted and afraid, I swore to myself that she would regret underestimating me. Because in that moment something shifted. The papers on my chest were no longer just a symbol of betrayal. They were a challenge, a trigger, a reminder that life doesn't end when others abandon you, it begins. And as the night stretched on, with machines humming and monitors flashing, I realized that she had handed me the one thing that fear could never take, the reason to rise stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. While she thought she had ended my story in that hospital room, she had no idea how much was already in motion behind the scenes. I had spent years quietly building a life that wasn't flashy, a life that no one noticed because it moved slowly, deliberately, like water carving stone. Small investments, hidden accounts, legal protections, and even backup plans, everything carefully placed out of sight. She had mocked me for being boring or obsessed with money, laughed at the discipline I never flaunted, never understanding that invisible preparation is the true form of power. And now, as I lay recovering, every one of those quiet decisions was ready to come alive, to protect me, and to turn the tables in ways she could never have imagined. The first few days after leaving the hospital were disorienting. My body was weak, my muscles sore, my mind foggy from pain and medication. Yet even in this haze, I felt a growing awareness, a spark inside me that refused to be extinguished. I thought about her smug confidence in the hospital, her assumption that I was finished. That smugness was her biggest mistake. People who walk away from others in moments of weakness rarely understand that weakness can be deceptive. And she had no idea the storm she had triggered. I began meeting quietly with my lawyer, reviewing accounts, trusts, and arrangements I had made years earlier. Every meeting reminded me how invisible preparation is the strongest kind of power. While she spent her energy imagining freedom, imagining control, imagining victory, she failed to see that she had unknowingly played her hand at precisely the wrong time. Every protection I had set in motion quietly now became a wall she could not breach, a trap she could not undo, a truth she could not escape. As I reflected on the years, I remembered all the moments she had laughed at me, mocked my patience, or dismissed my quiet discipline. "Why save so slowly?" she'd ask. "Why be so obsessed with the future?" She had believed that short-term drama, impulsive emotion, and instant gratification would always win over steady, unseen effort. And now, all that she had mocked, all that she had overlooked, was the exact reason she was powerless to take what she thought was hers. A week after my discharge, she called, expecting me to be weak, pliable, desperate to reconcile or negotiate. She assumed I would still be the same man lying helpless in that ICU bed, stripped of control, stripped of pride, stripped of power. But when she walked into the room for our first meeting after the hospital, she saw a man completely different. I wasn't aggressive, I wasn't smiling, I wasn't smug. I was calm, composed, and entirely in control. And for a moment, I watched her confidence falter, the slightest crack in her armor forming. The lawyer handed me a folder of documents. I didn't need to open it immediately. I leaned back slightly, letting her notice the shift in my posture, the clarity in my gaze. Her smile faltered almost instantly. The aura of superiority she had carried so confidently in the hospital room vanished. She was no longer the one holding all the power. Every account, every investment, every quiet protection I had put in place was now a wall she couldn't touch. A system she couldn't breach, a move she hadn't foreseen. The irony was delicious. She had assumed leaving me at my weakest would guarantee her victory, and yet it had become her undoing. As the meeting progressed, I could see her panic growing, almost imperceptibly at first. The way her hand twitched, the small pauses in her speech, the way her eyes darted nervously to the papers she had expected to use as leverage. Every sentence she tried to control faltered. Every argument she rehearsed in her head failed. She had assumed she could manipulate the situation because she believed I was weak. But what she didn't understand was that the real game had already begun long before she walked in that room. Even when she tried to negotiate, I remained calm. I didn't gloat, I didn't taunt. Silence can be more devastating than words, and I let it do the work for me. Every hesitation she displayed, every micro-expression of fear or uncertainty, was proof that the balance of power had shifted. She had expected chaos, desperation, weakness. She got clarity, control, and a quiet, unstoppable confidence. And that realization, seeing her belief crumble slowly before my eyes, was more satisfying than revenge could ever be. By the end of the meeting, she left not with satisfaction, but with the realization that her assumptions had been catastrophic. She understood now that her timing, the very thing she had believed would give her control, had handed me the advantage. And as she walked away, I felt something that was not anger, not revenge, but a deep, unshakable clarity. I had survived. I had adapted. I had turned my weakest moment into the foundation of my strength. Even alone afterward, as I reflected quietly, I realized the true lesson. Real power is invisible, slow, and silent. It grows in the background while others mock, assume, or underestimate you. And when the moment comes, it reveals itself in ways that can't be countered. She had believed she was in charge, but she had already set in motion the very circumstances that would ensure her defeat. And I, lying quietly just days before, had watched the seeds grow without her ever realizing it. The night after that meeting, I lay awake thinking about her, about the arrogance that had led her to believe she could control everything. She had thought she had walked away from something broken. She had no idea that abandoning me had only activated the power I had been building quietly for years. Every insult, every laugh, every moment she had mocked me came rushing back. But instead of breaking me, it reminded me that patience, strategy, and silence are the most lethal tools of all. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt a quiet, unstoppable certainty. The man she thought she had destroyed was already unrecognizable, stronger, and untouchable. She walked into the meeting room, confident, composed, with a smile that had no hint of doubt. Her steps were deliberate, as if she were entering the final stage of a performance she had rehearsed for weeks. She had imagined me weak, desperate, shattered by illness. She believed that walking into my life at this moment would guarantee her victory. What she didn't expect was the man waiting for her, calm, steady, and entirely in control, radiating a quiet force that she couldn't measure, couldn't anticipate, and certainly couldn't confront. The lawyer slid the first folder of documents across the table, and she reached for it, assuming she would find exactly what she expected. Leverage, power, a chance to secure everything she thought was hers. But the second she opened the papers, her eyes widened, her confidence faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear. The careful, deliberate structures I had built over years, trusts, accounts, legal safeguards, were now fully visible, impenetrable, untouchable. Her carefully imagined victory had turned into a trap she had unknowingly walked into. And all she could do was stare. She tried to speak, her voice steady at first, as if rehearsed words could undo the reality she was seeing. I don't understand, she stammered, flipping through the documents with growing panic. Her fingers trembled slightly. Her posture shifted. Every word she had rehearsed to manipulate me or control the situation now faltered against the quiet strength I radiated. She realized, too late, that her assumptions about me had been catastrophic. She had assumed my illness had stripped me of power, but it had not. In fact, it had been the trigger that awakened the force she could never predict. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't taunt her. Silence became my weapon. And in the silence, every micro-expression, every glance, every hesitation she revealed spoke louder than any words could. She had believed she was in control, but the room itself seemed to confirm the truth. I held all the cards. The very act she thought would humiliate me had instead exposed her vulnerability, her short-sightedness, and her arrogance. She had underestimated patience, underestimated discipline, underestimated resilience. And that underestimation would cost her everything. For a long time she continued to scan the documents, searching desperately for a loophole, a mistake, a flaw she could exploit. She looked around, expecting someone, perhaps the lawyer, perhaps me, to falter, to give her a sign of weakness. But there was none. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to move. I simply let the reality of her miscalculation settle in. Every account she had assumed would be available, every asset she had imagined walking away with, was already untouchable. Every small decision she had thought trivial, mocking my saving habits, dismissing my quiet discipline, was now her undoing. I watched as comprehension slowly dawned on her. First confusion, then disbelief, then panic. She realized that timing had not granted her power, that abandoning me at my weakest had not secured victory. On the contrary, it had activated something she could not see, a force built silently, patiently, and invisibly, waiting for the exact moment to reveal itself. And in that realization, her carefully constructed confidence began to crumble, leaving her exposed in ways that were both satisfying and sobering. She tried to negotiate, to salvage some control, to regain a semblance of power. But every question she asked was met with calm, measured responses, and every attempt she made to manipulate the situation faltered. Her body language betrayed her. The slight quiver in her hands, the hesitation in her voice, the way she avoided eye contact with me. She had expected a man desperate and broken, and instead she found clarity, composure, and the quiet force of someone who had survived far more than she could imagine. As the hours passed in that room, I could see the transformation in her posture, from confidence to confusion, from bravado to panic. She had thought leaving me in the hospital gave her leverage. But in truth, she had handed me something far more powerful. A chance to turn weakness into strength, humiliation into clarity, betrayal into a lesson in patience and strategy. The man she had dismissed, humiliated, and abandoned was no longer the one she believed she knew. Finally she turned to leave, her face pale, her voice trembling, her confidence shattered. I did not gloat. I did not speak. There was no need. The victory had been silent, quiet, undeniable. And as the door closed behind her, the weight of the journey struck me, not in anger or hatred but in clarity. I had survived the worst. I had outlasted betrayal. I had grown stronger while she had acted impulsively. And in that quiet triumph, I felt something far more satisfying than revenge: freedom. Alone, I reflected on the lessons hidden in that storm. Life doesn't reward impulsive action, arrogance, or luck. Life rewards patience, preparation, and silent persistence. She had walked away thinking she had won. She had no idea that her assumptions, her timing, her mockery had triggered the very circumstances that secured my victory. And that, I realized, is how true strength works. It waits, it grows, and when the moment comes, it reveals itself in ways that cannot be challenged. And so, to you watching this story unfold, remember this: the quiet decisions you make, the discipline you maintain, and the patience you practice in silence are more powerful than the loud, impulsive victories of others. The small, steady actions you take today compound into strength tomorrow. Strength that cannot be undermined, strength that cannot be predicted, strength that survives betrayal, illness, and arrogance. If this story has made you pause, think, or feel the fire of motivation ignite inside you, don't stop here. On Love's Cape, we explore more truths that can change your life forever. Click on the next video, The Power of Compounding, and discover how small, consistent actions, over time, build unstoppable strength, wealth, and respect. Because in life, love, and power, the quiet choices you make today determine the victories you achieve tomorrow.